In the past, I've tried to express myself using the standard critique vocabulary we're all used to online. X is bad because it doesn't make sense. Y is bad because it contradicts Z. However, in Dread's case, this mode of thought may have been a distraction. It seems to lead me away from what I find most relevant. My issues with Dread go beyond whether or not the plot holds up logically. Ultimately, even if Dread had some secret cutscene filling in all the plot holes, I wouldn't suddenly begin enjoying it. So why should I bother talking about that stuff? I'd rather describe the game in a way that cuts to the core of why I hate it. If I had to use two words to describe Dread that encapsulate every issue I have with it, I would use irreverent and tactless. In any collaborative work, such as an ongoing franchise passed between studios and artists, a certain level of creative freedom is afforded to each collaborator. However, this is a two-edged sword. That same creative freedom can absolutely be abused. If I draw 2/3 of a work of art and hand you a paintbrush to finish it, you could try and finish what I started, or make a complete mess. When tasked with continuing an unfinished work, you typically won't be able to erase what's already been made. You may also inherit some ongoing through lines or issues to fix as well. Therefore, conventional wisdom says you should try and maintain the through line of what you were given, while allowing yourself to add to it in meaningful and compatible ways, never losing sight of the original vision, but allowing for an expansion on it. Of course, since it's your choice, you could also say to hell with what came before, and criticize, mock, cut short, or just ignore what you're given to work with. The Chozo have a through line drawn by all of the Prime games. They have a ghost-like presence, looking after and almost following Samus throughout the series. Their fascination with deep cosmic knowledge makes them feel like higher beings, with aspirations that reach far beyond Samus's current situation. This leaves so much room to explore just what it is they're seeking. If not, it still paints a very clear picture of the priorities the Chozo hold. Of course, as we've established, nothing is stopping Dread from exercising its creative freedom in the way it does. However, in doing this, it forces a hard cutoff of the previous through line, and creates a jarring lack of transition. Where there was a unified image of the Chozo deepening with each release, now there are two, which are all but incompatible with each other. And in my estimation, one is far less thoughtful than the other. We don't get any exploration of this newly defined subset of the species or how they contrast against what we knew. The writers are perfectly content having written them as evil character and good character. This is a much lower caliber of storytelling than what we're used to with the Chozo, and that simply adds salt to the wound. They've gone from being one of the highlights of the series' excellent writing to the equivalent of Saturday morning cartoon characters. A similar situation is seen in the character of Samus. Over the years, we've had 3 separate personalities defined for our protagonist. It seems that each time a Metroid game tries to shake up the formula, it also likes to play with her emotional disposition. By far, I prefer the Samus who is stoic, getting the job done while still showing human emotion when the time calls for it. Metroid Dread, in what I can only see as an abuse of its creative freedom, transforms Samus from the cool, level-headed warrior I know and love into an absolute monstrosity. Again, no one is saying they weren't allowed to do that, especially if Samus pleads insanity via Metroid DNA. I simply believe that was one of the least satisfying directions you could have taken Samus's character, given the series' history. It almost feels like whoever wrote this story didn't even know the Prime games existed, as if they genuinely believed Fusion was the only other game in the series. Of course, there's no way you'd miss the 3 most critically acclaimed titles in the franchise, so perhaps this direction was chosen specifically to avoid being similar to Prime, to be different for the sake of it, to resent Prime for its great work, or to minimize it and act like it left behind a blank slate. Whatever the reason, I can only view this behavior as irreverent. It's clear to me that Dread has no concern with the state of the franchise it's been handed, or the fans it leaves behind. While outright dropping Fusion's hanging plot threads, redefining the Chozo and Samus with no regard for what came before, and even pushing the gameplay into a focus on bosses, Dread makes no attempt to alleviate the whiplash it's causing. It also actively avoids restraint, instead pushing its extremities as hard as it can. Extreme poses, extreme facial expressions, extreme stakes, extreme voices. It seems childish in how loud it is at times, as if restraint isn't a principle to hold by, but an aesthetic that you turn on and off depending on how you're feeling. The game hasn't even begun learning the definition of tact. The same can't be said about the Prime series, which nailed the concepts of reverence and tact nearly 20 years prior. Leaving behind advanced technology and mechanized guardians, the Chozo and Super Metroid are already somewhat mysterious. Their absence from Zebes tells a bit of a story in itself. Prime takes that inkling of story given to it, and it draws it outwards, expanding it into the Chozo mythos we've fallen in love with. The same can be said about the Space Pirates, and later the Federation. Prime perfectly meshes with what came before, while elevating it way past the original scope. It's unbelievably reverent to its source material, while also offering additions of its own. It also shows the proper amount of restraint. While Samus is immensely powerful, you can tell it's a struggle for her, not only in that she's occasionally overpowered by her enemies, but also in her response to the situations she finds herself in. You won't find moments where Samus forgets the reality in which she exists. You won't see the game bending over backwards to accommodate some circus act she performs for the camera. What you will find are many instances of Samus looking ahead and calculating her next move, or moving to avoid danger. An area where Prime's reverence and tact coincide is in the character of Samus. What little we knew of her from Super Metroid is taken to heart. Her choice to take on planetary threats, not as an ultimate hero's journey, but as her fucking day job, means that Samus should have a rock-solid emotional disposition. What do we see when Samus is confronted by otherworldly monstrosities and even her friends' killers? Not fear, not anger, but cold, unshaken determination. Even still, this doesn't prevent Retro from allowing Samus to feel appropriate emotions. She shows them in ways that are subtle, but still very powerful. Her character is the perfect step forward from the Samus we see in Super Metroid, and an excellent example of the restraint practiced by Retro Studios. It's Retro's restraint that showcases their maturity as a writing team and their mastery of the craft. It's their careful treatment of prior works that allows them to integrate into and enrich the series they create for. Retro represents everything I love about gaming as an art form, and everything I hope to emulate with my own creations. They are the reason why Metroid has been my favorite game series. It's because I trust them that I still have hope for the franchise, if Prime 4 is as good as rumors suggest.